her well. Sparkly eyes that saw too much, pale as a ghost, too skinny by any means. The first time I saw her, I feared her. The second time I saw her, I was cautious of her. And the third time, well, I loved her. Hello, X. My grammar is atrocious, and quite frankly, my story is forgettable. But I want to tell it anyway because I can no longer trust my memories. So, I will start with a girl called Alice. I remember when I was 12, I was in bed. I had awoken to a sound from under my bed. It was a low, soft sound. I actually tried my best to block it out and continue sleeping, but it was persistent. So, I looked around my darkened room. Nothing about it was scary, and I didn't feel anything wrong about it. Thinking it was a part of my imagination, I was about to roll over and go back to sleep, until I decided to look under my bed. I bent down and peeked under my bed. A girl of my age was laying under it. She looked back at me, as scared as I was of her. Her skin barely covered her skull. Her hair was thin, although still long and black. She was dirty, in clothes that were ill-matching. We stared at each other for what felt like 5 minutes, although I'm sure it was only a couple of seconds. It wasn't until she was about to talk that it broke the spell between us, and I ran out of my room and took off crying down the hall. And that was how I had first met Alice. The next night, I slept in my room again. I was determined not to believe the previous night. I didn't want to accept that I saw a girl under my bed. Plus, my mom wouldn't let me sleep in her room. It was about 3 a.m. when I awoke to find her standing in my room. I was terrified to the point that I couldn't move. I froze up and I couldn't even scream out, which, in retrospect, I'm thankful for. She stood in my room and, at first, I couldn't understand what she was doing. It took a few seconds to realize she wasn't standing there being creepy. She was standing in the middle of my room, eating a candy bar that I had left on my dresser. I slowly sat up from my bed. My fear, although there, was bearable. She turned to me and looked frightened. Slowly, I turned to the dresser beside my bed. Me being the neck-beard pig that I am, I handed her some leftover pizza that I had left there. She approached my bed slowly, cautiously, and delicately took the pizza from my hands. She stared at me for a few seconds, nodded, and crawled under my bed. I hesitantly checked under the bed a minute later, and she was gone. The third time, I was prepared for her. I brought with me a plate of food. I figured whoever she was meant me no harm. She was just hungry. She couldn't be a ghost because what ghost would eat food? And I woke up to the sound of her finishing the food that I had left out. I wasn't scared this time. I was more curious than anything. She turned and looked me in the eyes, and slowly she approached me. Even with the unhealthy skinniness and the tired look in her eyes, she was nervous around me. She was as confused as me by my presence. She was as confused as me by my presence as I was to hers. She stood at the foot of my bed where I was still sitting up, watching her. I remember her looking at me, looking at the bed, then swallowing, and slowly crawling onto the bed beside me. She lay there, looking at me for the longest time before, finally, speaking. As she spoke, tears rolled down her eyes. "Can I stay a little longer? I don't want to go back into the darkness." Well, I didn't know what to say other than just nod my head. It surprised me how fast she fell asleep. I watched her for a long time. This strange girl who was so hungry and exhausted that she would willingly sleep in a strange dude's house just to escape something. I'm gonna admit, my 12-year-old self fell in love with her that night. I fell asleep too, but she was gone in the morning. I met her more times than that, but I'll save those stories for another night. I'm 25 now, and now I'm starting to get visits again, but not from Alice. I get visits from a woman with red hair, wearing a red dress, and a combo-breaking orange eyes. She never talks. She just stands there in my window when I come home, always watching and never staying when I come inside. This red lady is not Alice. I had seen Alice for 3 days straight, and yet we never really talked. I think the first week, the communication wasn't the most important thing on our minds at the time. I know, weird, but when you have a girl start appearing out from under your bed, you tend to not think logically. Anyway, my fear of Alice was virtually gone. The fourth night, I had planned to talk to Alice to find out what the hell was going on. Sadly, I had already been getting sick the previous day, and now it was even worse. I felt so weak I couldn't get out of bed, and I was constantly freezing while having a high temperature. Perfect time to be getting the flu. My mom was gone for the night, and I was home alone. Technically, my brother was supposed to be there, but he got stuck at work. Like the previous night, I left her a plate of food which had my dinner, as well as her share. She came early this time, at around 9 p.m. She crawled from under the bed, looked at me, and I guess mistook me for being asleep since she, quietly, and with great care, made her way to the food and slowly began to eat. By this time, my fever had gotten worse. To this day, there has never been a time in my life where I felt so horrible. My bed was soaked with sweat, and I could barely think straight. It was difficult to keep my eyes open for more than a few seconds at a time. I remember passing out and waking up to her looking over me. She looked worried and kept feeling my head. I passed out again as she looked over me, but I woke up to her getting me out of bed. Now, this girl was still super skinny, and I don't know how she found the strength to help me walk to the bathroom. I walked as much as I could, but at one point, I remember being dragged inside the bathroom. The next memory I have is being dumped into a bathroom full of ice-cold water. I think I screamed, but even now my memory is hazy from here. I don't remember what happened all night, except Alice sitting there holding my hand and singing a song to this day that I've never heard of again. All I know is that every time I opened my eyes, she was there. The last memory I remember having is hearing the front door. She looked around for a brief moment, squeezed my hand, and took off running to my room. My mom sure as hell freaked out, seeing me half conscious in a bathtub with my clothes on. Not sure what would have happened to me if she hadn't been there, but I'd like to think she saved my ass that day. So, to continue with Alice. The night I finally got to talk to Alice was very terrifying. Not from Alice specifically, but from the mystery of where the hell she was coming from. I only caught glimpses of her when I was recovering. I would leave out what food I had for her, and remember once or twice opening my eyes and finding her sleeping beside me. I wasn't really well enough for too much of anything for about 2 days after the flu. Feeling good and strong again, I prepared her meal, a few old clothes for her to wear since she always seemed to be in the same ill clothes whenever she came, and I stayed up for her to come. I waited until 12 before I got restless. I don't know what it was about this night, but I felt really awkward in the room. Granted, I am still to this day a very nervous and shy man, but that wasn't the feeling I was experiencing. I paced around the room feeling like something was off when I looked out the window. I wouldn't say there was anything creepy about what was outside, but looking out at my backyard made me uneasy. If anyone has ever been out at the country, you'll know how freakishly dark it truly gets. There are no other lights out except what light you bring, and it feels like the darkness is surrounding you, crushing you. My house was in an area with plenty of lights, but looking out the window, I couldn't see more than 5 feet away from the window. It was total blackness. It was thick, all-consuming that made it impossible to tell what the hell was out there. I could see more light closing my eyes than looking out at the blackness outside my window. I backed away and went out of the room. The place was empty. My mother or my brother, who were supposed to be there, were not. The only other person there was my cat. Fucking hell. I retreated back into my room and closed the blinds. I was on the edge, but oddly, still relatively calm for a 12-year-old. I looked under the bed and I saw the same blackness I saw from outside. I remembered I stared at the blackness for the longest time, just wanting her to come out so I wouldn't have to be alone in my home. And yet, nothing happened. I inched slower under the bed and I felt the floor beneath the bed start to slope down. I remember sitting there, debating to go on more, but finally deciding to risk it anyway. In truth, as much as I was lonely, I was growing worried about Alice as well. I don't know if those two things made me go on or not, but I started to crawl deeper. The deeper I went under the bed, the darker it got. Luckily, the light from my room never seemed to dim. It was always there as a beacon, which, in truth, If it had at any point gone out, I would probably have gone insane from the fear. I crawled, I stopped, and I crawled again. It was like a cave that allowed enough room to crawl comfortably, but not enough for me to stand. I was surrounded by darkness without ever seeing the walls or ground that I followed. It felt like I was crawling on dirt, but who knew? I don't know how far I crawled before I felt a change. It was like a click. One moment, I was crawling in a dark tunnel. Next, I fell a foot on wet ground. I looked up a moment just to make sure I still saw the light to my room before I fully looked around my surroundings, and I screamed like hell. I was surrounded by dead, naked, and bald bodies. They were skinny like Alice and had that same haunted look as her. I remember closing my eyes and screaming like a goddamn banshee. It all hit me just like that. I finally knew, somewhat, where Alice came from. A big part of me wanted nothing more than crawl up the tunnel and never look back, but I couldn't leave Alice in this area. For whatever reason, there was a pocket of space here where the dead bodies did not crush me, and Alice either had to be here or be one of the bodies. I frantically searched like crazy. I called out to her, not knowing her name at the time, and I crawled over the dead. It wasn't until I took a hold of myself that I heard the faint sound of crying. I followed it, and eventually, I found Alice. She was laying there, hugging a body, crying and naked. Her hair had been shaven and her eyes had been blackened, like someone had punched her repeatedly. She jerked towards my direction and looked at me. Tears flowed like a river from her eyes, and she spoke to me through broken sobs. "They killed her. They killed my mom." I could only watch her in stunned silence. She hugged the body that used to be her mom and cried harder. I just wanted to drag her out of here. This place might as well have been hell. And with that horrible thought, I smelled burning flesh. I did not realize that the tunnel of bodies had gotten brighter and hotter, and I lost it when I realized the bodies were starting to burn onto the top. I didn't see the flames, but I knew somewhere on top of these bodies, flames were beginning to blossom. I was ballistic with fear, and only remember grabbing her roughly before I violently crawled back towards home. I remember her struggling with my grip. I remember screaming and crying, but I don't remember the crawl back into my room. When we finally crawled into my room, Alice and I did nothing more than cry, and I don't think we both stopped crying until a few hours. I know I was the first, and I know I was the one to first start holding on to each other. Slowly, the tears slowed down, but they never stopped. We could break apart from our arms and look at each other. I remember the awkward pause when deciding the question to ask her without her losing control again. I think for my own sanity, I needed to know. "Who are you?" I asked. Her name was long, and one that I couldn't pronounce. I called her Alice by accident, and the name stuck. She didn't seem to mind. "Do you come here the same place every night?" I could tell she held back tears, but she answered steadily. "Every day they put me into a dark room. I found this place in the darkness. When I go back, I awake in my bed and everyone else is gone." I hated asking the other questions because I thought I already knew the answer. "Who are they?" She looked at me for a long while, kind of searching my eyes. "Men in uniform." I think it was just pure fear on why she didn't say the name, and I let it drop. "Why do you go back every night? You can stay here, you know." She shook her head. "I've tried. I always have to return, like something's pulling me." I didn't say any more. I was already still getting over the previous event. We didn't say much after that. Now that I look back at it, I think we were both in shock. I watched her as she curled up into the fetal position, and she fell asleep. It wasn't until an hour or so later that I realized she was still kind of naked. Her body was so abused and frail that I didn't really register it until now. I picked her up, put her into bed, and I didn't remember falling asleep. But when I awoke, she was gone. Now, the stories where it's just me and Alice are running out because, to be truthful, this is close to the time where I meet up with a boy called Tim and his sister, and they get involved. I can stop with the story soon and leave it as is, but if I continue with it, I'll have to talk about Tim, Sarah, and their own quote-unquote issue. I tried to get Tim to post his version, but he barely remembers it, and when he does, he gets suicidal. He was never the most sane person due to what happened in his life, even before me. Alright guys, here's a story to tide you over. I didn't get much sleep the previous night, and I suffered for it until school ended. I don't think I was even aware of anything that the teachers had tried to teach me. I was just totally turned off from the outside world. Not wanting to go home, I went to Target for some cheap food. I sat down, ate some popcorn, and made a list of the things that had been happening. I had just written a few sentences before I started to notice an argument developing a few feet away from the food court. There was an older mother, maybe around 40, who was starting to scream at a girl of around 15 to 16-ish. I don't know exactly what started the mother screaming, but she was fucking brutal. It may not be exact, but it's from my memory of what I heard. The mother screamed, "Can't you do fucking anything right? I'm sorry. I ask you to do one fucking thing, and you can't even get that right. Now you're gonna cry and blame it all on yourself. I can't believe how damn selfish you can be. Always have to take care of you, and you contribute nothing." At this point, the mother was screaming. I remember looking around for someone to do something, but everyone else pretended not to be hearing what was going on. I even remember a few assholes laughing. "You know what? Go home. I don't even want to look at you right now." "Wait, Mom, how am I to get home?" And the mother left her there in the middle of Target. The girl didn't even cry, she just looked startled. I remember watching her look around, walk around the store for a few minutes, and then, eventually, sit down by one of the tables. I was kind of taken aback myself. Target employees watched, but they looked angry at her, which I couldn't understand. I watched her sitting down, rocking back and forth, while occasionally biting on her lip and shaking her head like someone was asking her questions. The more I watched her, the more I realized that there was something a little off about her. And then a manager came and actually kicked her out. The girl asked to use a phone, but the manager just shook his head and escorted her outside. I don't care how internet badass this might sound. I swear if I ever see him, I'm going to punch him in the back of his head. So, I went outside to find her in the parking lot, looking lost. To be honest, I was nervous as hell because I didn't know how to approach her, but I didn't want to just do nothing, you know? "Hey, do you need help or anything?" I remember her staring for an uncomfortable amount of time before smiling. "Do you have $1?" And that was how I spent my day. I paid for her bus fare back home, helped her find her street, and I walked her to her house. All the while, she would talk to me, but she would also respond to questions that I never even asked. She would laugh out of nowhere and bite down on her fingers out of habit. When we finally got to her house, she stared at me again for a long moment. "Who's Alice?" she asked suddenly. At this point, I was too dumbfounded to even speak. I had not once mentioned Alice to anyone yet, and definitely not to her. I think she took my silence as her being wrong because she looked like a person who just said the world's dumbest statement. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." She ran inside her house and was gone. I think I stood there for a couple minutes thinking to myself, what the fuck just happened? The rest of my day was a blur until I got home and waited for Alice. Like usual, late at night, the darkness returned, my house went empty, and she crawled out from under my bed. She looked exhausted, bruised, but it always made me smile when she looked at me, and her face brightened up. Call it selfish, but I would have gone into that hole again and again, just to have her give me those smiles. We talked, and I learned a little more about her. She was the youngest of a family of 3 girls, all gone now. Her father was the only one still alive, though, but she didn't believe he would last too long. They had come thinking this was a temporary relocation. They had packed clothes, swimsuits, games, and etc. And when they arrived at the camp, their clothes were thrown out, they were stripped, searched, showered, and fed food that would either make you sick or it killed you. No matter what time during the day, they always rounded up a random amount of people with her in the room. They would be taken to a dark room where she would always see the light from my room and run to it. Once she made it to the entrance to the tunnel, she couldn't be affected from the room. She told me she watched, while somehow being protected in the tunnel, as something was dropped inside the room. The people inside would panic, and then choke, and then die. The story gave me nightmares. She had tried to get her mother inside the tunnel the night when I went in after her. Her mother couldn't go through the entrance, because for the mom, it was just another wall. After hearing this, I knew I had to do everything I could to make sure she didn't go back there tonight. My brilliant plan? I hold her down when she started to get the urge to go back. I mean, hey, I wasn't the most brilliant 12-year-old in the world. About the time she felt the urge, I had wrapped my arms around her tight. She would grip onto me for dear life, but her body would just spasm and jerk randomly. She would cry out, beg me to stop her from going back under, and then relax suddenly. This happened maybe 5 or 6 times until it finally stopped. It was an hour before we started to feel like we had done it, but suddenly, like a flash, she was being pulled by the legs. I didn't actually see anything grab her, but I held onto her as she was being pulled under the bed. I could see the sun starting to rise from my window, and in my mind, if I could just make it until sunrise. I don't really know how to explain this next part. Something formed out of the wall. I doubt my words will be good enough to describe it, but it had long arms, it had dark skin, and the most beautiful glowing purple type eyes. It was spider-like, but also had skin that reminded me of tree bark and long fingers. It was both beautiful and terrifying. I remember looking in those eyes and just freezing. It felt like I was melting or becoming undone, for a lack of better words. I remember feeling fear, and then numbness, and then just nothing. At that point, I think it was the time that I let go of Alice. I can't be sure, though. I remember it looking at me. I'm not sure if it spoke out loud or what, but it asked something along the lines of, "How are you here?" I replied, but even today, I can't remember the answer I gave. And next thing I know, I wake up with pissed pants, puke all down my shirt, and I'm alone. I wasn't able to save Alice. I don't know what that thing I saw was, but I never saw it again. I'm not even sure if it was there to intentionally block me from saving Alice, or if it was just curious. The next time I tried to block her from going back under, I understood more on why I might have attracted it. I didn't have any clue what to do next. Trying to explain to my mom why I was covered in puke and pee was a bitch. I somehow got through the day even though I wasn't really right for my encounter. I kind of went through the day in a haze. To be honest, my memories were erratic, and it took me a while to remember even simple things, like my last name, where I lived, and etc. Slowly my memory returned, and Alice soon invaded my mind again. Like I said earlier, I didn't really get the impression that it was there to stop us. It felt more curious than anything. It still posed the question, though, how in the hell do I save Alice? I was walking home from school when Tim caught up to me. Tim wasn't by any means a tough-looking dude, at this time in his life, but he was crazy when he would get into fights. When you first looked at him, he reminded everyone of that skinny, nerdy kid you might see at school, who always wore the same clothes day in and day out. What made him so dangerous was the fact that when he fought, he just didn't care about anything. Tim was the type of dude who would go into a group of 12 men and start a fight. They would beat his ass, and then he would come back a few days later with the information he learned. Once he beat them, no matter how long it took, he moved on. To be fair for him, he never targeted single people. He would just go down to some of the rougher neighborhoods and repeat the process. So when he came up to me, I admit I was nervous. I mean, it's a dude who just got beat up just to improve his fighting. I fear that more than just some random dude wanting some lunch money. Hey Tim, what's up? Hey, were you the one who helped my sister yesterday? Who? The girl at Target? This kind of shocked me for the simple fact that Sarah was Korean mixed with Mexican, and Tim was black and white. They looked nothing alike. Yeah, that's her. Hey, I just wanted to say thanks, man. If anyone ever messes with you, I got you. Yeah, thanks, no problem. I replied awkwardly. He was about to walk away when I blurted out, "Hey, can I follow you home? I know it sounds weird, but I gotta ask your sister a question." He looked at me weird, but motioned me to follow. "Go for it, but you probably won't get a straight answer. You know she's kind of crazy, right?" I nodded. "I know, but she knew about a friend that no one around here knows about. I gotta see if she can help me out." He stopped and turned to me. He looked me up and down with no emotion on his face. To be honest, I thought he was gonna hit me. "They think she's schizophrenic, but she's still my sister." I didn't know where he was going with this, but I nodded. He eventually continued walking. We made it to our house and found her sitting on the yard, looking at the sky and talking to herself. She looked at me, smiled an awkward smile, and continued looking at the sky. "Hey, Sarah," I started. Tim had left to go inside the house at the time. "Hey, how do you know about Alice?" She looked back at me and smiled shyly. "The voices. They talk in the background most of the time. I kind of have it bad. Like I see stuff that I know shouldn't be there. I can see a witch flying around in the sky, and when we were in the bus, I saw an alien sitting right across from us. I know it's not real, but sometimes it feels real. I didn't really understand schizophrenia at that age, but I remember hoping I never developed that. It sounded like a nightmare. When you were leaving, all my voices stopped. They all kept laughing at you for trying to save Alice." "That is very creepy," I admitted. "Is she real?" I hesitated, and in the end, I nodded. "Who is she?" Tim asked behind me. He handed me a Coke, sat down on the lawn, and waited. I sat down myself. I remember sitting there, with the two looking at me, and I just began losing my shit. I don't know why I decided to start crying there. I guess it was the mixture of the last day, Sarah's imaginary voices telling me to basically fuck off, and just the pressure of not telling anyone about it. After all that crying, I still didn't want to say it out loud. I really don't know how to explain her. They had watched me cry patiently the whole time, and it was Tim who finally spoke. "There's nothing you can tell me that would be too far out there for me to believe. Sarah sees and hears things that aren't real, but each night, we hear the same damn thing. Me and her both see something that neither of our parents can see." He looked angry and tired. Whatever it was, it unhinged him just thinking about it. "If that's not the worst of it, I have to fight my mom each day to not let Sarah end up like my aunt. You saw how that bitch was. She would do worse if I wasn't there to stop her." He had to visibly control himself just to keep himself in check. I looked at Sarah, who nodded, and I looked back at him. "What is it you see?" Tim gave me that long, searching stare again, before he reluctantly got up from the grass. "Come on, man. Better for you to see for yourself. First of all, thank you all for being patient and making this thread. And second, this part is going to turn confusing for you, because when I was explained this, it was confusing to me. The only way I can explain this is that she dumbed down a lot for a 12-year-old boy. It might get clearer later on, but anyway. We walked inside Tim's house. I don't remember much of the house except the smell. It smelled stale, like nobody had taken out the trash for a long while. The house itself was clean, but that was the first smell that entered my nostrils. My aunt, she's schizophrenic too. My mom keeps her locked up in the basement. We used to be able to talk to her, but she's slowly been drifting away lately. We stopped at the door to the basement area. I tried to talk to her, but He didn't finish his sentence. I wish now I could go back and tell him it wasn't his fault, or a responsibility at this age, but all I could do back then was not. We walked in the door, made our way downstairs, and I took my first glance at the room. The basement was a basement. It was not even made to look anything close to a room. The air was cold, the stench was foul, and the lighting was dim as hell. There were boxes lined up against the walls that were old, moldy, and forgotten. Not to get too philosophical on you guys, but I guess that's how the mom viewed the aunt. Something to be kept, but forgotten. I remember walking a few steps, then hearing Tim getting pushed, and the door slammed shut. I looked over to see Sarah locking the door behind me. She grabbed and pulled me back and whispered, "That's not my aunt." At first, To my shame, I just thought her schizophrenia was acting up and she was having an episode. But when I looked at the aunt, who was sitting down in a chair and facing us, I was slowly agreeing with her. She looked like any middle-aged woman, fairly attractive, wrinkles, slight weight, etc. But when you looked at her, something seemed off. The best way to describe the feeling is to look at an actor who put on makeup to look like they're 80 years old. Yeah, they have everything physically right, but in the end, you always have that feeling that the look is off. Anyway, it just looked fake. Even if you can't get the specific reason why, that was just the feeling I got when I was looking at her. Hello, Papa. The one thing I will always remember about her is the accent. It sounded Caribbean, even though I don't know from exactly where. And for whatever reason, she would always refer to me as Little Papa. I stood there, leery of her with Stara still clutching my arm. She never seemed scared, far from it actually, but just relieved. I think she was more nervous with the whole situation not being real than any actual danger. Who are you? I finally asked. It doesn't matter who we are, Little Papa. I know why you're here. Her movements were jerky. Her joints snapped whenever she made any major movements, and certain motions seemed like it was hard for her to move at all. I'd like to take the time now to say that this part of the story has been edited a bit. I had a hard time understanding her concepts, so a lot of it was back and forth. To save myself time, effort, and sanity, I clipped out a chunk of the parts of me being really fucking confused. Is this to do with Alice? Alice is only half the issue here. Do you even know the significance of your situation? I have seen few who are as fully here as you are. When she got up from her chair, it sounded like every muscle was snapping. Imagine cracking your fingers, then imagine that sound being made every time you bent any of your joints. That was the nauseating sound she made every damn time she moved. She picked up a book, turned the page, and handed it to me. Young Papa, if you think you can do anything to save that young woman, you're crazy. I had a feeling already before I even looked at the page of what I was going to see, especially when I saw a Nazi uniform on the front. I looked down, saw a picture with bodies stacked on top of each other in a pit, and there she was, in the middle, eyes open but totally lifeless. I dropped the book. I don't remember the actual feeling on how I felt about seeing Alice dead, but I do remember feeling rage when the thing started laughing. It was a mixture between taunting and chuckling, and for a brief moment, I didn't care what that thing was, and I didn't accept what that picture showed. I must have ran straight towards her because the next thing I know, I slammed the thing against the wall. It laughed harder, and I slammed it again. I was by no means strong, but that thing felt like it was weightless compared to the backpacks I carried from school. I think I screamed either, "Why are you doing this to me?" or "How do I save her?" but Sarah, by that time, had pulled me away from it. She held me back, and I remember her calmly rubbing my hair. It must have worked to soothe me because I remember visibly relaxing. Now, Little Papa, you barely know this girl. You think you can save her from her fate? All things must pass. Else, how do we move on? Why stop the natural process? I don't care. Why stop it though, Little Papa? She'll die either now or then. Makes no difference. I hesitated before I answered because I wanted to talk calm before I continued. I had already cried once that day. I can't let her die alone in that place. She's my friend. Friend! Fuck you. It laughed again, but it seemed friendlier. If children can be the cruelest beast, then children can be angels as well. I never got the reference until I got older, so I ended up just looking at her confused. Hi, Little Papa, the reason why she is here is because the world you are in is not the correct one. Most people live their lives in a world that isn't close enough to be affected by anything that isn't what you would call normal or physical. So, what, is this a dream? No, not at all. This world is as real as the world you should be in. Most humans think they live in one world. It's more complicated than that. You live mainly in one, but a part of you lives in one very similar. It mirrors the world where most people are mainly at. what makes this world so different. Some people are quiet and some people are talkative. They have very different perceptions, but they still share the same world. A better but still simplistic way of looking at it is that when a person sees a spirit, it is a soul going more towards their world. You are a man who walks in a place usually reserved for spirits. Usually that only happens to the old. So, what about us? I had not realized Tim had somehow gotten in. He was leaning against the doorway. Are we real then? He was indicating himself and Sarah. Young one, you are more real here than in the world he should be. Most of you is there than here, but the true self is here. I shook my head. I didn't really understand then, and even now. I'm still not too sure what the hell she was going for. For me, though, it wasn't unimportant enough at the time. Yeah, okay, what about Alice? She is from the world where humans like. At night, she crosses here. Did you do this? I asked. No, little papa, this was a freak accident. Like attracts like, you were the most like her. Instead of going naturally to one world, to another, she skipped and went to you directly. So how do you know this? I swear, the thing had the most shit-eating grin I had ever seen. Little papa, if I don't want to be seen, I don't have to be seen. I think we all kind of stiffened up at that point. In order to save Alice, she either has to be killed, or you have to move to her world. I've already been down the hole, though. No, little papa, you must be there for as long as it takes. She must stay here for a while with you. You must stay there with her. The thought scared me. The bodies surrounding me, the smell, what Alice was put through each day. I would be lying if I said I was 100% willing, without any hesitation, but I could handle the beast in my room more than the thought of the hole. It's up to you, little papa. Pick and live with your choices. I looked at Tim and Sarah. They shrugged. I felt bad for not telling them everything at the moment. Why are you helping him? What's in it for you? Tim had asked. Its smile vanished, and she gave a look that looked like someone was seeing past you, then at you. We remember being human, it said simply. What are you now? Asked Sarah. I am not the same from the Bible. She reached out and touched Tim on the cheek. He looked angry, but she only smiled. She made a voice that, to the best of my ability, can only describe as both playful and sinister. Call me Legion. It giggled, walked past us up the stairs, and went to wherever it was heading. She didn't eat that night, which worried me. She snuggled near me, but didn't talk much. The cat sat on her lap, and she had a soft smile on her lips. Alice? Yes? Don't give up. She looked at me. I'll never forget those tired eyes. To be honest, I don't think I could ever pick up on something like that at my age right now. And I don't know how I could tell she was close to giving up. Alice, please just trust me and don't give up. Stay alive for me, please. I know you're tired. Just hold out. I told her everything that happened that day. She listened without reacting. When I finished, she forced a smile. I think I'll be saving you as much as you'll save me. It was a tired and forced smile, but she still got up and ate. The rest of the night, we chatted about everything that didn't touch upon the camp, and I showed her the joys of video games, and she talked about her previous home. I showed the movie Toy Story to her, and she cried, but she enjoyed the film. I don't remember falling asleep, but I remember waking up alone. I skipped school that day. Tim and Sarah found me later that day. I think we should help you, Tim told me. He looked the most relaxed when he told me than I had ever seen him. It took all I had to make sure I didn't tear up again. So, this is where she comes in from. Tim was bent down, studying the area beneath the bed. Sarah was looking at a few books, mostly focusing on the concentration camps. I had been preparing food for Alice when Tim had asked me. Yep, it'll slant down when she comes. Tim crawled under the bed, looked around more, and then got out. I feel like we should be getting her more than just food. I agreed with him, but Alice told me otherwise. She said they might target her if she stood out. There aren't many ladies in her area. Of course, they always took her to the gassing room each night anyway, but I think she was worried about being shot or beaten. None of them ever remember taking her to the chamber each night. You would think they would notice. No, she says she wakes in her bed. I used the term loosely. The way she described it, they were more like shelves. They mark her off like nothing happened when they take roll. Tim nodded and glanced at Sarah, then paced around my room. That day, Sarah's symptoms were worse. She was hearing voices that told her to kill her mom, which had made her tense. Sarah, you know if it's too much. No, I need to concentrate on something. She never looked up from her books. I don't even know how to prepare for something like this. Tim sounded so frustrated. Our evil aunt didn't give us much to go on. It was another hour before Tim looked outside and noticed the unnatural blackness. I looked under the bed and, sure enough, it had changed again. Sarah looked ragged when she saw it, and couldn't stand looking at it or out the window. We closed the blinds to the window, looked around the house to make sure everyone was gone, and we waited for Alice. It was Tim who first noticed it. It was a faint sound, so soft that I think we would have missed it if we had been talking at the time. I looked down the hole and I heard it clearer. I couldn't tell what it was, but I was worried about Alice. I'm going to check it out right quick, I decided after a few minutes. I never really counted before how long it took before Alice showed up, when the hole showed up, but I didn't want to take chances. I'll give it to Tim. It only took him a few second hesitation before he asked to go with me. I wasn't going to argue. At this point, Sarah was looking at the hole, knees against her chest and rocking back and forth. She was humming loudly. Stay here, okay? I told her. She nodded, but didn't look at me. She told me later that she was hearing voices telling her that the hole led to hell. They might as well have. I went first, with Tim following behind me. The hole was dark and felt even more cramped than last time, but it was bearable knowing that I wasn't alone. I remember passing by a pair of clothes, and for a second, I feared it was her before I remembered her telling me she kept a pair of more comfortable clothes in the hole. I dropped in a small room with very little light, and for the first few seconds, I was fine, until I started getting shortness of breath, and then my lungs began to burn. Tim, while still in the hole watching me, pulled me back in when he saw what was happening to me. I hacked and coughed, but breathed normally when I was back in. But even when I was trying to catch my breath, my mind was racing. I didn't know if I had breathed in a batch of gas or not. The room was very small and empty and almost completely dark, if not for the slight light from the tunnel. I saw Alice lying on the ground. Her breathing was labored and she looked unconscious. I realized the sound we had been hearing were her labored breaths. Tim held his breath, went inside to pick her up and carry her back in. When she was inside, her breathing got better. It was a pain to get her back up and took us about half an hour altogether. About time we finally pushed her through, she was awake but still too weak to move. They put me in there. I was fine for a few hours, but I couldn't breathe the longer I stayed in. I saw the hole, but I was too weak to crawl to it, she told me weakly while I was laying her down in bed. I don't think it was gas or you'd have been dead already. It felt like there wasn't any air in there, I replied. When I got older, I learned they actually did have areas like that. She nodded weakly and sat up. She smiled shyly at Tim and Sarah. Tim was trying his best not to look at her. She didn't have any clothes on when we found her, and she still didn't now. She gripped my hand. Don't trust that thing. If you come with me, you will die before you make it a day. She held up her arm and showed me numbers tattooed on her arm. They mark us. They'll shoot you if they find you. Please don't trust that demon. Just leave me. I saw her eyes and realized she was more worried about me than herself at this point. All right, just rest, okay? She looked at me a few seconds longer before she laid back down and closed her eyes. I was even more frustrated now than ever. She was right, but it still didn't help the fact that now I had no idea how to help Alice, other than try to keep her from going to the hole again. I didn't know if I would see the one thing that appeared the last time, or if we would be able to succeed. What now? I asked everyone. There's no way we can leave her. We gotta try to keep her here, Tim replied smoothly. I don't like it still. That's what it wanted us to do, remember? Sarah wasn't looking at anyone but her hands. She was right, but at the time, I didn't know any other way. And like Tim, I wasn't going to leave her this time. When she woke up again, we got her clothed. I went back down the hole to retrieve them, then fed and bandaged up. It was an awkward talk between us. Sarah was withdrawn and Tim was growing tense, thinking about later. Whatever happens, thanks for everything, okay? she told me later on. I hugged her tight. Whatever happens, I won't leave you. You're not alone. I know. I remember her squeezing me so tight she left a bruise on my back. For whatever reason, even to this day, I still feel sore out of nowhere. When it started, it took me and Sarah to hold her from going back in. Tim started out making sure nothing messed with us. She thrashed harder this time and screamed while begging us to not let go. When the sun started to rise, we felt the unknown force start to pull her. For a split second, we were being pulled down with her, down the hole, before Tim grabbed onto a shelf with one arm and held us tight with the other. She didn't stop being pulled until the sun finally reached halfway over the horizon. One moment, I remember holding on to her for dear life, and the next, we slammed into the ground when the pulling stopped. My arms felt like jelly and I remember my chest burning, but I let out a weak cry when I saw the hole was gone under the bed. Alice looked around and burst into tears while she smiled. Tim and Sarah were laughing. I don't think we expected to last as long as we did. And right when I was about to stand up, that was when the pain started. It started as a small pain. I think Alice managed to get out one word before we all started screaming. The pain itself was strange. My body itself was not in pain, but it felt like my body was the container for the pain. It pulsed inside my body, then vibrated a few seconds later, and back to pulsing again. This repeated maybe 3 more times until it slowed into a slight humming sound in my ear. The first time I tried to move, it was like my arms were misfiring the signals. I would try to move my arm, and my leg would move. It took a few tries before I got control of my body again. There was a moment of silence while we were all catching our breaths. The voices in my head are bitching about the pain, Sarah called out slowly. I don't know why it was so funny then, but all 4 of us burst into bouts of laughter. Shit! I looked at Tim, who was looking at Alice, when I saw what caused his reaction. Alice's hair had grown back to the way it was the first day I started seeing her. She touched it slightly and looked at me questionably. I just stared back in disbelief. The door to my room opened, and my mom peeked in. She looked at me, then Alice, then me again, and closed the door without saying a word. I look back now and wonder why this didn't alert me to anything strange. My mom is a tough lady who would have killed me if I had snuck in women to my room at age 25, let alone 12. But I guess I ignored it because, well, I simply did not know how to tell my mom that I pulled out a girl from under my bed that connected to an extermination camp. We were in a semi-trance for the first part of the day where we barely talked about the event. Tim and Sarah left for home, and I got Alice to take a shower, which, as I write this, I now realize why a girl from the camps would not like a closed-off shower area and why it took so long to reassure her. We went to breakfast together, and again, my mom didn't say anything. She made a plate for Alice, without even saying a word or even looking at her. We ate, dressed, she took my old clothes to wear, and left the house. I would like to say now that the next few weeks were some of the happiest ones I remember, and if nothing else, I'm glad memories of these events resurfaced in my life. Remember the face of your significant other who has seen something for the first time in their lives? It's a wonderful feeling, seeing their face light up, seeing their eyes glaze over and joy take over their body. Everything is new to them, and it makes the small things you have taken for granted feel like something majestic. That was Alice. Pure and simple. Everything was new to her, and I loved watching her treat everything with so much excitement. Cars, malls, candy, it all made her happy, and it was infectious. I took her everywhere from libraries to parks, and especially movie theaters, since she had grown fond of Toy Story. We hung out alone. We hung out with Tim and Sarah, who stayed over more and more as time went on. Yeah, you could call it the honeymoon phase of the relationship, but I was on such a high with her. We probably would have not noticed anything off if it wasn't for Tim bringing it up. Sarah was used to hallucinations because of her condition. Alice was too new to my world to take notice, and I was too into Alice to even care for the outside world. We were walking down the street, all 4 of us together drinking soda, when Tim had stopped and looked around. When did we get so many cherry blossoms? I stopped and looked around. This all took place in a small town called Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma has a lot of trees, and I do see some trees that, what I assume are cherry blossoms even today, but most of the trees are regular old green trees, like pine. Tim was right. I finally noticed that a lot of trees were in fact different. It was like someone took maybe 25% of the trees and replaced them with these beautiful oddities. I vaguely remember thinking to myself of a Christmas tree. We didn't mention it again while we were walking, but I think that was the point when something had sunk in. Alice had been staying with me all this time, and yet my mom had still not mentioned anything. Tim and Sarah had not even spoken to their mom for 2 days, which might be normal to Sarah, but not Tim himself. The weirdest thing that got me thinking was how loud everything was. I don't mean by people or cars or just general man-made things, but you could hear more wild animals like squirrels, birds, dogs, and etc. It was like camping away from civilization, and the general nature itself was loud in my ears. No one has really talked to us, you know? Sarah said uneasily when we went back to my room, and it was true. We interacted with people when we needed it, but it was only after a reaction. No talking, just a reaction to us, like some lover giving you the silent treatment while making you breakfast. Maybe we should go back home, Sarah told Tim. I can live without seeing Mom, but... Tim grimaced, but nodded. I think he enjoyed his time away just as much as Sarah did. They left right when the sun was going down. The hole had still been appearing, but thankfully for us, it had no longer tried to call back Alice. We were actually able to ignore it for the most part, after the initial fear was over. Is it really that strange? Alice asked, referring to the cherry blossoms. Not really, but I couldn't put it into words. Even now, it still seems like a small thing to focus on, but it was just the first thing that stuck out to us. Alice let it drop. We looked at the bed and felt an uneasy stir. It would have been different if the hole never came back, but it was still there, taunting us. You think we can sleep somewhere else? And that was when we saw Sarah banging her fist against the window. Sarah was screaming, blood running down her face and absolutely panicking. She banged her fist one more time, looked behind her, and ran away from the window. Something slammed against the window after her. I couldn't see what the hell it was at the time, but I did see claws bounce off the window. Hearing Sarah's frantic beating, she ran inside as soon as I opened the door. Where's Tim? I screamed at her, but I think I was too pumped up on an adrenaline because I didn't even bother waiting for her to answer. I just ran outside. Outside was pitch black, but I saw the thing that had chased Sarah, and I can't remember if that was the time I pissed my pants or not. It stood on all 4 legs and looked closely like a dog, except the damn thing was 6 feet tall and extremely wide. The beast had an almost human face, if not for the long snout at the end. It crackled as it walked around me like sick laughter. It was circling, looking me up and down like it was considering what to do with me. It stood on its hind legs like a bear and gazed over me. I thought that was the moment I was going to die. But for reasons why I do not know to this day, it got back on all 4 legs and walked away. I have no clue why it didn't go after me that day, while it went after Sarah. I ran back inside when I heard Alice call me. I heard piercing screams coming from my room and realized it wasn't coming from the 2 girls. There were people coming out of the hole. None of them were clothed. All were shaved, and all had the same look that Alice had. My bed had been knocked to the side, and it looked like 10 to 20 of those people had all gotten stuck at the entrance. They had grabbed Sarah and Alice. I crawled out of the hole into the middle of a forest. It was morning. It was cold. And although a beautiful clear day, it was already creepy as hell. A woman walked up to me and offered her hand. I cautiously took it and she pulled me up. Can you tell me where I am? I don't know where I am myself, I replied. The woman tilted her head. She had no expression on her face. My body is over there. If you see someone, can you tell them where my body is? I didn't really know how to respond. I guess I should have been scared, but since she didn't look crazy or look like a ghost, I was only confused, or even numb to it all. She nodded and walked away. I never saw her again. I walked out of the forest onto a road. It wasn't until a few minutes that I realized that I did know where I was. The problem was that the street I was on no longer had all the houses that I was used to. There were a few, but they looked either abandoned or, at the very least, unused. The further I started walking, the more nature I was running into. I could handle that well, but after a while, I started noticing a few things. First, every once in a while when I was walking, I would see an orb of light slowly fly by. They would hover, maybe stay in place a distance away from me, and then start to float away again. At first I was scared, but the more I saw them, the more I got the feeling that they were just curious and keeping a safe distance away from me, which made it easier to notice the beauty of them. They were shiny balls of light that would shine beautiful colors that never stayed the same. To this day, I really wish we had something similar to see here. I started seeing people as I walked further, but I couldn't get close to them. They looked like they were from a different time, but not any I could tell, since sometimes I would see someone who looked Native American, and other times I would see someone who looked like they were from the 80s. For the most part, I got the same type of reaction from them all: fear and caution. For whatever reason, they were afraid of me. If I tried to get someone's attention, they would either run away or look like they were about to crap their pants. They never attacked me or anything, but after the 4th time where a Korean woman cradled her child away from me and asked me to spare her, I left them alone. It wasn't until an hour later that I ran into an old man. He was Chinese, crazy gray hair, and drinking what smelled like alcohol. To be truthful, I was so disoriented from everything that I didn't even mind when he came by to talk to me. "Welcome." He gave me a slight bow. Hi. You are lost, are you not?" "Yes. No, I mean, I know where I'm going, but this place is..." I didn't really know how to explain it to him, but he nodded knowingly anyway. "You are from the New World, friend. This world is the Old World. Men have left this world in favor of the New." "How do you know?" You stick out a lot here. Most look at you and think you are a demon with the way you shine. How did you get here, friend?" I was really hesitant to talk to him about anything, but at the same time, I didn't know where to go from there other than to find my friends. The woman who had saved me from the tunnel had made me cautious as well. After coming out and seeing my world change, it did feel like either I or the world was fading away. He invited me to sit on a log, and I took him up on the offer. I told him everything, and when I was done, he was quiet for a long time before he answered me. "The lady that saved you is right. You brought someone who is from another world into yours. It is upsetting the balance and sending you further away from your own. The longer she is here, the more you will fade until you are just a spirit." I was distraught. I can't leave Alice, though." "You don't have to. You both belong to the same world. That impersonator is right, although she was trying to deceive you. You have to first go to her world, and then bring her back to the world where the main you should be. You and her are both lost in a way, but you are always connected to your proper world, and she is here fully, which drives you away." I was beginning to understand, but I was still lost. "So, even before her, I was still lost?" "Yes. Most people, from fear or their own reasons, sometimes hold back themselves. You held back most of yourself in your life. We all exist in 2 different worlds. One where we are mostly present at, and one where we hide ourselves away. They are the same and not. Some people are in the middle, and some are more in one than the other. You, my friend, are one of the few who are more in that hidden world." He got up from the log, stretched, drank his alcohol, and laughed. "That deceiver. She can help, but it is not purified. She is made of many spirits, for whatever reason. She is both good and evil because she has both the good and bad parts of man. Her corruption is what makes her untrustworthy. If you want to separate it from her, purify her, and the evil will separate. If you can have her help, they can send you into your proper place. How would I purify her? Take whatever religious symbol you need that wards away evil. Doesn't matter which one. If you believe something here, your beliefs have power. If you are a person who believes in hell, when you die here, you can go to hell if you believe yourself bad. This world is closer to the world of spirits." He looked at me and nodded. "Take good care, my friend. There are many demons in this world, but only some can actually harm you. I wish you well." And with that, he walked away and left me alone. It was a while before I noticed something. I could feel 3 different points driving me different directions. 2 were further away while 1 was closer towards me. I followed them on instinct. It was Tim I found first. I thought he was dead because I found him laying in the middle of the road, but when I approached him, he turned his head towards me and slowly got up. "What happened?" I asked him, very concerned. Watch out for attractive women here, he laughed as he stood up. I was talking to this lady and it felt like she just drugged me. Some Asian dude wearing a nice hat saved me, but he ran off after he chased a woman. He looked around and became more serious. Where are we? Is Sarah okay? I explained everything to him as we started walking. Purify, huh? I guess we can get some holy water or crosses, Tim said after a while. It sounded like the best course. I was relieved when I saw Alice and Sarah walking my direction. Alice ran up to me and gave me a bear-crushing hug. Sarah, on the other hand, stayed cautiously away from us. You okay? Tim asked. Sarah looked at us and I felt alarmed. She didn't want to get near us. When Tim tried to approach, she swung a rock at him and she screamed. She's been like this ever since you left. We hid in the bathroom together, but I couldn't get her to talk. She hasn't spoken to me until now, Alice said. She was getting more panicked by the second. Tim cursed and walked over to Sarah, but she kept on backing away. None of you are real. I'm not even real. You're all imposters. How do I know you're my brother? Sarah? It's okay. Tim wasn't able to get out a word before Sarah pulled out a knife. It seemed like no one breathed when the knife came out. It wasn't so much that I was afraid of her, but I was afraid of what would happen to us without her. She might have had her issues, but we were in this together. Everything had changed around us, but we were the same. Sarah, look at us. We're your friends, Alice began. How do I know you're real? Doesn't matter. Do you really want to kill us? We haven't changed, Sarah, and we aren't going to change, Alice said softly. Sarah, we need you. We can't do this alone, I pleaded. She looked at us both for a long time, then gave off a bitter laugh. What have I done? I can't even do anything without breaking down. Thankfully, she put down her knife. You don't have to do anything, Tim said, relieved when the knife went down. Where the hell would I be without you? You think Mom was the one who took care of me? She only treated me good because you were here. He said the last part bitterly. It was the only time I had ever really seen him cry. Tim had always explained his mom as tough, as a woman who would not take any weakness. She viewed Sarah as a weakness, but she left him alone, not just verbally or physically, which I always expected but never found out, but left him alone in general. It was Sarah, in her state where control of herself was always fragile, that had taken care of Tim. Maybe it's just me trying to get too philosophical, but sometimes I think that was the true reason why Tim got into fights so much. Guilt that her condition was the one that left him safe from the abuse. She stared off into nothing for the longest time before she nodded at us, seemingly embarrassed. I don't care if you're real or not. You guys are still the most real thing in my life, she smiled at Alice. Even you, who traveled through time and out of someone's bed. We all laughed, relieved. I know how it looks reading this now. Sarah never did anything that directly saved our lives or anything. But what Alice said was the simple truth. We needed her, just like we needed Tim, or Alice, or, hopefully, me. Even if it was just nothing else but emotional support. I filled the ladies in on what happened. Alice did not like the news that all of this was, in her mind, mostly her fault, no matter how much I tried to tell her it wasn't. Shit happens, I told her. I'd rather have it happen to us anyway. I feel guilty for saying this, but in all honesty, I do not think I would have gone through the shit I went through if it had been an adult instead of her. I don't know if we can find holy water, but crosses should be easy. I mean, we can make one if we really need to, right? Most come from a factory, Sarah explained. We found one in one of the few houses that were still around, although it took a few hours. Most of the houses looked completely untouched, although still in good condition. Some even still had electricity, although we wondered how that was possible with so few modern areas around. It was a semi-large cross, about 1 foot tall and painted gold. Sarah held the cross, put it to her face, spoke a prayer, and handed it to me. It was uncomfortable in my hand. It almost felt like it was burning my palms. We debated, but in the end, we decided the best place to start looking for it would be the place where we first met it, Tim and Sarah's house. and it was still there when we arrived. We were nervous, scared, and determined. We were also weak. I was tired, my mind was everywhere, and I felt like I hadn't eaten in days. Looking at everyone else, I imagine they felt the same. Worse yet, during our walking, we were beginning to see more orbs, more people who saw us and cowered in fear. Some even ran when they saw the cross that I carried. I don't think we have much time, Tim had told us, and he was right. I felt like we were fading more away from the physical world. We walked down to the basement where it was waiting for us. The thing sat there, in the chair like a queen, waiting for its royal subjects. It looked at the cross, but looked at me and held its eyes to mine for almost the entire time. I wish I could say we had an epic battle where me and Tim fought like maniacs, and a thing that still looked like his aunt transformed into some winged succubus beast that flew around. I wish I could say we were almost defeated and it was Sarah being super awesome who saved us at the very end and we were able to purify the demon and make it into an angel. I wish that because it would have been the straightforward story path that seems like the noble and right thing to do. But no, real life sucks, and sometimes the options are between crappy and shitty. "Hey, little papa," it said, smiling. I nodded towards it in greeting. I walked towards it slowly, afraid it would get up. It took a few steps to realize it couldn't get up. The crucifix was draining it, even though it hadn't even touched it yet. Its eyes quickly looked at the cross, then back at me. Too many of us believe in that symbol. We know what we are. A sinner. A demon. We know we don't deserve salvation, and we knew what would happen when we all went to the other side. As I got closer, it started to move away in pain. "We don't expect you to understand why we misled you. We just wanted to live life again. We have done horrible things in our lives. Not one of us have lived a good life." It glanced at Alice, then me again. "We have done much worse than what happened to Alice. We know we should be punished. We know we deserve that. Some of us are even glad for the end, but why does it have to hurt? Where's my chance for redemption?" It took me a moment to realize it was crying. I stopped a few feet away from the thing. "How do I save ourselves?" I asked. It shook its head. We can't go back there, not without a body." "Why?" "Because we are stuck with all the things that earned our damnation." It did not move. "There are only 3 ways to go back into life. To be reborn, to forge a new body, or to possess another one. I would never be reborn, and to create would destroy us. So, it was my body you wanted." "Yes." "I would never survive going to Alice's world, would I?" I realized as I stood over it. "How could you? They are very good at what they do. You would die as soon as they found you." It smiled, but there was nothing behind it. "There was still that other part of you, that one who's barely there in the world. That one who would have never had the energy against my possession. Yes, we wanted you dead. You think death is any fear to you? You don't have to fear the flames." I looked at the thing, pinned down against the power of the cross. I watched it tell me it had wanted me to die so it could possess my body, which at this time still confused me, and the one thing I wanted to do was kill it. I remember gripping that damn cross which still burned in my hands, and I remember its face. Fear, hate, acceptance, but above all, anticipation. "God damn it, little papa, do it! Do it! End this, you're no worse than me! Maybe the part of me that won't burn will earn salvation." I put the cross near its hand. It was sickening. Its skin turned black and started to crisp and flake off. It screamed as part of the arm started to bubble and blister. I removed the cross away from it and stepped back, shocked. The thing cried, cradling the arm that was scorched. It believed in the power of the cross, but in a literal sense. It would burn, and maybe for eternity. Maybe it would be purified, but it was made of many different souls, and who could say which ones would go to their version of hell? I looked at Tim, who shook his head. I looked at Sarah, who could only stare at the burned arm. I looked at Alice, who looked me in the eyes. I would do anything to save her, but I could not send something to be tortured for who knows how long. Wasn't that what I was trying to protect Alice from? I turned away from it, and all my friends smiled. Alice looked back at the thing. "What's your name?" she called out to the thing. She turned and looked at us. "We call ourselves Mahdi. Alice smiled at Maudie with pity. Not all religions believe in hell, you know. What are you going to do now, little papa? Maudie asked. I looked at Maudie, shrugged, and we left the house. I was surprised when we found out that my house was still there. I guess I shouldn't have, since Tim and Sarah's were still there, but I was feeling rather defeated. We confronted a thing called Maudie, and I couldn't even purify it. That thing got to live while Alice's life was still hanging in the air. I did not like that one bit. Well, Sarah began, oddly upbeat. If Alice has to go back, then we can at least find out if we can escape from the camp. There has to be some people who have escaped it before. Why not us? We went inside my house. The rooms were trashed. The bed was broken in half, and the hole wasn't there yet. We found the books and started to go to work. I don't think we've made it 5 minutes before Tim slumped over on the ground. We rushed to his side, but he was completely unconscious. He's fading. We really gotta go, Sarah said nervously. We were all tired and weak by this point. I was having a harder time keeping my eyes open, and Sarah looked like she was the next one to pass out. Alice looked haggard, but better than the rest of us. I agreed with Sarah, but the hole hadn't shown up, and without it, we were stuck. I tried to keep alert, but it wasn't long before I started to lay on the ground. There was just too many questions. We all assumed that getting Alice back to her place would set everything right, but with the issue of Maudie had left us doubt. Alice back in her world would save her from fading, but not from death. Worse yet, we really didn't know if us going with Alice would be the right thing to do. The rest of us, through reasons of our own, didn't really want to stay here either. If I could, I would want to thank Sarah and Tim for not once suggesting that we let Alice go back, alone, to her fate. It probably would have been the smart thing to do, but I would never have been able to accept it. It was when I was too weak to move, on my back and dizzy, that I saw the hole appear again, and I knew what was about to happen. It even sounds cliche typing it here, but knowing the person Alice was, I knew what she would do, and I was too weak to really stop her. I looked at the hole, then looked down, and saw Alice crawling to me. She got on top of me and stared into my eyes. She smiled as weakly as the first time she smiled at me, the first time we actually smiled at each other. She slowly, weakly, and passionately gave me a long kiss, so long that I thought she had passed out in the middle of it. When she finally lifted her head, she simply said, "Thank you for my life," and crawled her way into the hole. I passed out for a few hours. I don't practically remember dreaming, but I do remember waking up with more energy. The sun was peeking through the window, and I was feeling more normal. I wasn't really able to move around too much. Still felt like I was half drugged, but at least I could sit up. Sarah and Tim were laying side by side, still unconscious, but thankfully, breathing. My body was vibrating slowly, which created a low humming sound to my ears. I assumed I was getting in sync again. I sat in my room, feeling alone and sad. She was gone, and I couldn't save her. No matter how hard I had tried, I just couldn't save her. It wasn't fair to go this far and have it end like this. I looked at where the hole should be, but found only the bed. It took me a moment to realize that my room was going back to the way it was. My bed had moved itself back into proper position, and I sat up enough to peek outside, and saw more houses had started coming into view. I looked away in disgust. The door to my room opened. A woman who looked about in her mid-20s walked in. She had light brown skin and had hair that were done in braids that went down to her lower back. One of her arms looked like it was burnt black, although she could still move it. "You can change appearances?" I asked, shocked. "Possible. Very easy to do this far away from the physical world." Maudie tilted her head. "Feeling better?" "No. Alice is gone." Maudie walked over to me and very gently pushed me on my back. She bent down, sat on my waist, and pinned me to the ground. It wasn't hard, in all honesty. I was still very weak. She stared into my eyes for a long moment, and I didn't know what to expect, and a part of me couldn't really care less. "Are you going to kill me?" I asked, half afraid and half waiting it to be over. "Little Papa, you don't know how much I hate you," she told me softly. fucking hate you. Here you are, slowly returning to your world. You will live there, living your life forgetting about me slowly. Do you know what it's like, little papa, to have a doctor do unimaginable things to you? They hurt me, little papa. They hurt me a lot. I loved you even when I died. I stayed there, in that area, alone, stuck and scared. Do you know how alone I was? I was stuck in that area for 200 years. Time passed me by and I couldn't leave that area. You think me a demon, but those men were demons. I could not escape the horrors of what they did to me. I felt cold. You can't be. I am made of many parts, little papa. I refuse to believe you're Alice. No, not Alice. Alice was one girl. She eventually could leave that area. She found others like her, stuck in their horrible version of hell. We never wanted to be alone again, so we formed into one person. I am not Alice now. I am Maddie. She put her hand on my throat and gripped tightly. I hate you, and I love you. I was alone, little papa, while you lived your life. It's not fair. I loved you, and you forgot me. I looked at her as her hand started to grip. Maybe it was because I was afraid to believe it, or because I wanted to see it. But I swear I saw Alice somewhere in that mess. It was more strange than frightening to have one hand grip your throat, while the other rub the side of your cheek. Maddie, if Alice is really in there, then why did you try to kill me? To be reborn would lose us. We are one, but rebirth would mean to be alone again. That's not what I asked. You had a body. I wanted that body. Alice, why did you want to kill me? I tried to scream. Because I wouldn't have to be alone this time. Even with us, she's always alone. The mother, the father, the sister, all gone. You are here, little papa. You are here. Maddie gripped harder on my throat. I remember the smell of her blackened hand, and the soft, warm tears hitting my cheeks. And I could understand Maddie. It was one thing to die the way that they did, but it was the loneliness that drove her into being. A part of Maddie hated me for leaving her. A part of her still loved me. And as a whole, she was still corrupt with every single soul that made her. Alice, I love you, I told her simply. Maddie gripped hard enough to cut my breathing off for a few agonizing seconds, then relaxed her grip. Maddie, can you make another tunnel for me? I think I know what to do. She looked towards the bed, then looked at me. She kissed me lightly on the lips, and then slapped me hard. I hope you die in there, she sneered, but she got off from my waist. I carefully got up. What happened the first time? I asked, generally curious. Almost the same thing, except without Tim and Sarah. It ended the same with me going back. I smiled. Maddie, I forgive you. She stared at me for a brief second. Then she growled and walked off. I stared at the hole for a few minutes. I thought about my family and how much I loved my mom. I looked around my room, checked on Tim and Sarah, who were still sleeping, and I walked to the hole again. Here I come, Alice. I crawled down the hole, and I never looked back. When I was getting out of the tunnel, it was not what I had expected. I came into a building that was almost completely dark. I feared I was in one of the gas chambers, but I soon came to realize I was inside a hallway. The humming sound I had been hearing in my ears was very loud. It pulsed throughout my body to the point that I felt spikes of pain every 10 seconds. I walked down the hall almost blind at first. I couldn't tell which direction I was going. The longer I walked, the more I could see. It wasn't until a few minutes later that I started to see shadows appear every time my body pulsed. A few minutes later, I could start to see details to those shadows, and whenever my body pulsed, the world lit up from the darkness before going back out again. Luckily, every time I pulsed, I could feel the direction where Alice was, and I prayed that she was still alive when I got there. I followed the feeling until I hit a door, and I knew I'd find her on the other side. I was vibrating harder now. My body shook with pain, and I had to do everything I could not to give in to the temptation to curl up into a ball. The shadows were looking more and more real, and I didn't want to find out what would happen when the shadows took notice of me. They looked like soldiers. I opened the door, and I entered the room. There was one final jolt of pain, and then it stopped. The place was illuminated, and I felt more solid, more real. It was an odd feeling. I felt like I had returned to a home from being gone for years. I didn't have time to think on it anymore when I saw Alice. I saw Alice on a bed, shaking and breathing hard. Her legs were covered, but she wore no clothes. She looked like she had been beaten, and for whatever reason, it looked like they had removed all the fingernails from her hand. I was stunned silently from the brutality of it. I stared at her for a few seconds before I slowly walked over towards her. She had her eyes closed when I came in, and didn't, or couldn't, open them when I went to her side. "Why did you come back?" Alice said between labored breaths. I guess she had felt me as I had felt her. "I wasn't going to leave you here alone," I told her softly. I rubbed the side of her cheek and she moved towards the warmth of my hand. A few tears escaped through her bruised eyes. "I can't feel my legs. I don't think I could come with you this time." "I know. It would have been impossible with the soldiers just outside anyway." "You gotta leave. Please. They'll kill you." "Alice, I told you that I would save you. I can't save you the way I wanted to. All I can do is just be here for you. Please, please run. I don't want you to die," she pleaded. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying with you to the end. Whatever happens, Alice, you will not be alone." I felt so much peace at that moment. I had feared I would be too scared to go through with my decision, but the opposite was true. I felt no fear, no hesitation, just peace. I guess part of it was because I knew we would live on, in one form or another, and the other part was simply because once you fully choose a path to follow, you go through with it until the end. For me, this was it. There were no worries anymore, no more regrets. I could live, but to know that Alice would be in this place, alone while loneliness and the evil of this place seeped into her, was too much to bear. She cried harder, but she gripped onto me. I don't doubt that she would rather have me gone and lived, but I made my decision. I wasn't going to allow her to become a part of Maudie. It was a random moment, but I knew it was only a matter of time before someone came back, so I asked the question that had been bothering me for a while. "Alice, how did you know English?" She was quiet for a few seconds. "I don't." "How are you speaking it then?" "I'm not." I started laughing, and for a wonder, she slowly started laughing too. It was one of those weird moments where it shouldn't have been funny, but for some reason, it was. It was what probably had alerted the Nazis who were outside the room. The door slammed open, and maybe 3 or 4 guards were outside. I think I was able to get out and, "I love you, Alice," before I saw a gun pointed at me. I remember leaning over to hug Alice, and I remember seeing a flash in front of me. I don't remember pain, but I remember pressure from my chest, and surprise when I started falling back. I remember Alice screaming and something flying from her head. I remember when I was laying on the ground thinking to myself, this wasn't so bad. And then, I remembered no more after that. I heard the singing again, and I opened my eyes to emptiness. There was nothing but me, Alice, and a figure that I still cannot remember, although now I believe it's the red lady from previous. I don't remember actually seeing Alice, but I do remember feeling her, and I was relieved to have her by my side. I don't know if I had a shape or form. I felt good being there, like I was whole. I don't want to go so far as to say that I remembered memories of past lives, but I do remember feeling like many different people. I felt like I was once a child, a man, and a woman. I felt like a soldier, a wife, a thief, and a monk. I wonder now how much of that was I feeling without realizing it during this whole thing, because the decisions I made were not that of a 12-year-old. I don't think I could make those decisions at my age. "This is a problem for me," the red lady began. "I could work with the part of you being dead, if it wasn't the part that was needed. The part left behind will barely be a person." I didn't say anything. I was really peaceful and didn't much care for that matter. "I have need of you later. You weren't supposed to die. Your time was never to be this young. This disrupts too many lives. My job is not to have that happen. It was not seen to have those circumstances come together like this. I still didn't reply. I mean, I was dead, why bother? There is still that part of you that lives in the physical world. There is still a place for you to dwell. Do not worry. I know you will not leave without Alice. You're right. Here's the choice I give to you. If you decide to live again, you will have to sacrifice the part of you that still lives there. That part of your soul will help create and maintain Alice's body in the current world. She will live as long as you live. Sounds good. No, it doesn't. I will be cutting a piece of yourself away from you. You will be missing a part of yourself in this lifetime. I do not know what will be the consequences of this action. It might leave you with a reduced lifespan, or mentally disabled, or any other consequence. I'm not God. I only maintain order. I felt Alice, and I didn't think twice. Sure, why not? I replied. I felt sadness from the Red Lady. There will be pain. What I do will harm your soul, and it won't be whole again until the day you die. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sorry. And the Red Lady began to sing the song that I still cannot remember. I do not remember the pain, but even today, if I dwell on this memory, all I want to do is scream. I shake constantly, and I have panic attacks. I remember the horror of splitting away from a piece of myself, and all I can think of now is that I'm glad I do not have to remember the pain. Some memories are better left unburied. I woke up in a strange bed. Actually, I take that back. It was a bed I knew, but it was like reading a description of the bed from a story. I knew the details of it, but I don't intimately know the bed. I looked up and saw a room that was both familiar and strange. I had all the memories of everything in this room, but I didn't have the connection. It was enough to make me grip my head in frustration. I still remembered the pain of what was done to me at this point. I kept on feeling the side of my face and expected it not to be there. I felt so reduced. A part of me was missing, and I had no clue what exactly. I felt so alone, laying on the bed and feeling so empty that for the first few minutes, I was contemplating suicide. I eventually got up from the bed and looked around my room. I was in the right world, and it was a lot more different than I thought it should be. I lived in an apartment now instead of my house. I shared a room with my brother, although he wasn't in the room at the time, and it looked like I hadn't cleaned in months. My bed lacked sheets, just a blanket carelessly thrown on. I looked down on my own body and felt like committing suicide all over again. I was about 60 pounds heavier and fat as hell. The part of me that had lived here, this world, had simply not cared enough. He had coasted through life living day by day without really interacting or wanting to live life. I was almost glad that part of me was gone, if I didn't feel so off without it. My mind was slower, somehow. It took me longer than it should have to eventually get out of my room and take a look around my new place. The more I looked around, the more right it felt to be here. I was already forgetting the details of my previous house, and that's when it hit me. I ran, very awkwardly, into my room and began to write down everything that had happened. I wrote down all the details I could for Alice, Tim, Sarah, and etc. When the memories of the apartment were taking place, it was burying the memories of the house. I did not want to forget those memories. About the time I had written everything, my writings didn't even mention a house. I had assumed I was living in an apartment. Even reading everything, I knew I had left out details about other things. I heard the phone ringing. I went over to answer it. "Hello? Alex?" Sarah asked. It was technically my middle name, but in this world I went by my first. I didn't bother correcting her. "Sarah, what happened to you? I woke up and I was here." She paused and then continued fast. "Tim's not my brother here. My family's completely different." I squeezed my eyes shut. Another detail I'd forgotten, but her saying it made me remember. "What else is different?" "Everything. I have a different mom and dad now. I can't even remember what my other mom was like. What's happening to us?" "We're losing our memories," I said slowly. It was more like an invasion of the memories that we made here in this world. The memories were slipping away like the memories from a dream. She said we were in the world that we held back. I couldn't finish the sentence. I either couldn't put it into words or I didn't remember how to. I don't want to forget, though. He's my brother, and you're my friend. I almost forgot your number, and I don't even remember what you look like, Sarah screamed. Sarah, I started, preparing for the blow. How's your new family? She was quiet for a few minutes before she answered. They're great. I think my mom's going to help me shop for a dress for some dance. My dad is... She went on like this for a few moments. Not once did she mention her schizophrenia. She sounded happy, and I tell myself that this was why I did have her describe her family. When she was done, she was quiet. Alex, Sarah, it's okay. Let go. We'll always be friends. I lied. Maybe in some other life, but I doubted we would here. And Tim always wanted you safe. You have a good life here. Just let go, okay? She most likely didn't remember Tim now, after I had just helped her memory become buried, but it didn't matter. She was quiet for a long time. The next time she spoke, I doubt she really remembered anything. Hello? Who is this? Is Tim there? Oh, sorry, wrong number, sweetie. We hung up, and that was the very last time I had ever talked to Sarah. Even when I eventually forgot about Sarah, I still saw her around. If she had schizophrenia, it was either very manageable or non-existent. I remembered a few times later when we would pass each other by. We would look at each other awkwardly and walk away confused. When I started remembering these memories, I went and found her on Facebook and found out that she was married, in the Navy, of all things. I'm glad to see her doing so well. I was never able to talk to Tim before he forgot his memories. I wish I could say everything worked better for him, but he was a scrawny kid in this world who was constantly picked on. A few months later after these events, he started getting into more and more fights. He fights now for no known reason, to the point where I generally fear he will kill someone one day. We used to be slight friends younger in this world, but after this happened, we drifted apart fast. It was those awkward moments where we felt something missing that more than likely made us drift apart. I sent him an email a few weeks ago when I started to remember everything. I asked him about these events. It took a few days before he emailed me, and he told me to never bring this subject up again, or he would kill me. At the end of the email, he asked me if Sarah was safe. As far as I know, those two never met in this world. Not really concrete proof, but it was what made me start to believe it might be something more than insanity when I started to remember these events. For weeks, I did everything I could to remember Alice. I forgot that we had died. I forgot there was a Sarah and Tim with us, and I forgot about Maudie. I knew there were gaps in my memory, but I had to see if Alice was okay. It took a few weeks until I got a phone call. Hello? Hey, little papa. I'm sorry. Who is this? I asked, confused. Doesn't matter, little papa. Alice will be at the mall today. Better hurry. She hung up the phone. I didn't even waste time. I was on the bus in 10 minutes. I looked around the mall for a few hours, searching for her. I still remembered enough of her to know that I would know what she looked like. I was beginning to lose hope when, like magic, there she was, walking with her family. She no longer had those haunted eyes. Her skin was bright and healthy. Her hair had slight red highlights, and her eyes were cheerful. She was walking with her mom, dad, and her 2 little brothers. They were going into a Build-A-Bear store when I finally spotted her. When I saw her, my memories started to come back rapidly. I remembered Tim and Sarah, Maudie, my house, everything. I was excited and I started running over to Alice. And then I stopped. I remembered everything. The camps, our deaths, the pain and fear, her haunted eyes, her sadness, and the loss of her family. It was all too much. I started crying there at the spot. I was so close to her and I wanted to be with her, but I turned around and I walked away. If Alice saw me, she might be very happy to see me, but she would remember everything as well. She had lived a life that should never have been lived. I had gone to all this trouble to save her from her fate. I had given up a part of my soul to make sure that she would live a life here in this world. I had done everything and I walked away because I realized I would destroy everything that I've just done. She would see me and have to relive the horrors of the life that she thankfully could not remember now. She was happy. She had a mother and a father. She had brothers, and she no longer had to fear anything from the Holocaust anymore. I had saved her. It just meant I would never be able to see her again. I went to the food court and I sat down. I mean, what now? I'd done everything and now I'm left alone. These memories that I tried so hard to forget were a burden now. I focused on this life, on this world. I focused on my mom, my brothers, my house, my school. I focused on how I was going to lose the weight. Didn't work. Took me until like age 16 to lose the weight. And I hit 280 pounds when I started too. I focused on everything that I could that didn't have to do with Alice. A few minutes later, I went to the store to get some game and get some food at some Asian restaurant. By the time I went home, I remembered nothing but this life. I went through a lot of depression in my life. I never understood why at middle school my mind did not work as everyone else's. My mind has problems processing information. I can hear a person talk and get the general meaning behind them, but I always miss words, which ends up being torture at any type of schooling. For years, I felt constantly lonely, even with friends. It wasn't until high school that my life started to turn around. Only last year was I actually diagnosed with inattentive ADHD. Medication helps, but it's a struggle to work and everything slows down. I do wonder if this is the result with a part of my soul missing, but what can you do? You gotta work with what you're dealt with. And it was a fair trade. I only started remembering all this not too long ago. I found a journal which talked about something that happened to me 2 years ago at work, in which I was stuck in a building for a month until I escaped. When I read the journal, I not only remembered the event 2 years ago, but for whatever reason, this event as well. I doubt I'll forget it this time around. So, here I am, stuck with these memories and nothing really to do with them except share them. I shared them with you because I hated being the only one who knew what happened. On Saturday, I came home and saw my computer on. It had a Facebook profile, which showed a beautiful woman with pictures from a missionary trip to Africa. She's now a nurse working with kids. I stared at the image for a few moments, and I clicked off the profile. Then I cleared my history, and I never looked back. I did my job, and that's all that matters. I bolted to the door, hearing Santa. I said it again. Hearing Sarah. Can you not do that? Yeah, don't do that. You're okay. Yeah, you're okay. Meow. Be careful, baby. Anyway.